once again, this is the place. This is the place for intellectual, spiritual, and scriptural honesty, whatever that means. It's not the place of. We are simply admitting that it will take time to get to a place of honesty in all categories. And so tonight we have with us a very, very special guest, and we're looking forward to talking with him and seeing his work tonight. His name is David Hayward. And honey, what do you think about tonight? I mean, I'm excited about him being here and seeing his work and just, talking with someone who is this brilliant.
Well, I certainly agree. David is very popular among what we know the Facebook crowd, and some of our friends are just head over heels, on his side. And we have admired his work for, over a year. And I'm glad to finally come face to face with him. And I want to know, his heart, like what causes him to, talk a lot about women's issues. And that is dear to my heart. And I really applaud him for that. He has given a voice and an awareness for women to be treated equally, and that's sad to say in this day and time, but it's a long time coming.
Now we also have the unconventional pastor, Bob Graves, in the show, and welcome, Bob, to the show.
Great to be here. I always love talking with you and your guests, Dr. Jones.
Well, we love having you here, Bob, and you're the unconventional pastor, and David Hayward is actually the naked pastor. Kind of strange here, but it's going to be fun. Christopher Maute is also here. He's a genius and an excellent musician. Plays one of my favorite instruments, and that would be the bass guitar. And so, welcome, Christopher.
How's everybody doing tonight?
Doing excellent. How did the red gravy turn out this afternoon?
Spectacular. We tried something different. I'm going to have to show you the technique. We photographed and took videotapes of everything. I'm going to make it a little video for you and send it along.
That is so awesome. We had, out of the freezer, actually prepared lasagna, and I so missed, home-cooked lasagna and all of that. But we'll discuss that at another time.
I don't care. Lasagna frozen in a banquet meal or put together at a homeless shelter. I don't care. It's good.
Yeah, we just love
Italian
lasagna.
food.
That's right. It's good. It's good.
It's good.
Okay, this is going to be interesting, and we did have a hesitation simply because we had
an atheist with us.
we do have another atheist to our left. I didn't want to introduce him because he talks a lot. His name is Michael Fulford. Let's welcome Michael.
All right, Mike.
Everybody's commenting on his hat and his boots, and so he's the guy that has now the Atheist Hour on our network. Say something, Michael.
Hi.
Wow, that was short. that was a record. That was a record. David, why don't you get into the conversation? You are a wonderful person, and we can't brag enough about you, but honestly, we want to listen to what you have to say tonight.
I missed Mike's last name, the atheist guy.
Okay, Michael Fulford.
Fulford.
Right.
Have we met, Mike?
I'm not sure. We might have.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
What we're going to do tonight is we are going to look at some of your work, David, and explore what is meant by this art. But before we do, can we get a little bit of background about you, why you're doing all of these things? Because when we talked on the phone, it seems like you're upsetting lots of people in Christianity, and yet at the same time you're not attempting to leave Christianity in any kind of context. Is that true?
Yeah, I'd say that's true. I'm not like you say. I'm not trying to leave Christianity. I'm not trying to stay either. It's just Christianity is. I tell people that I'm Christian like I'm Canadian, kind of. It's so much a part of my DNA that I don't feel any need to cast it off or whatever, although I'm very highly critical of it. And I critique the church and religion in general, but Christianity in particular. That's my background, my history, my tradition and everything. And I also say, like, Christianity is my home, but I have cottages everywhere. And so, I guess I am upsetting people because I'm not willing to take on any certain label, and I'm not really willing to reject any either, I guess. So yeah, I'm in the middle of as many people know, I was an ordained minister and pastored churches for like 30 years, and then in 2010 I left the ministry and the church, but I'm still passionate about that whole thing, and I'm very involved with critiquing it and I don't know, encouraging what is good and critiquing what I think is bad about it, and so I do upset people and I encourage others.
Well, one of the things that really drew us to you, David, was was the fact that you were so inclusive, and came at a time when we had made steps to step out of traditional roles of being in a church and to be inclusive ourselves. And then when you see someone else that is going, head over heels to be inclusive, it really gives you that pep in your step. And so it felt like a kindred spirit. And so that was what really, it's strange to use the word, draw. We were drawn to you, and then your drawings came second. And once we, realized your drawings, we were just floored, as well as everybody else is. And
Thanks.
Yeah, you actually have a site where after we see all these, I'm sure people are going to want to purchase some of them to display or to make statements in their homes or to give away as gifts. And the gift giving season is upon us. And so absolutely, positively, we need to find out where we can purchase these pieces of art.
Well, I have thousands of cartoons, right? So it's hard to know. I have an online store. It's basically on the Etsy site, etsy.com. And my store is nakedpastor.etsy.com. So you can buy a lot of my cartoons and my Sophia drawings and my other paintings and things like that there. And I really appreciate you mentioning that. But yeah, I draw a cartoon every day, and I've been doing it since 2006. So there's a lot of cartoons, a lot of art there, and and they, people do like them. Some are the kind that you can hang on your wall, and then some aren't.
Tell me, what is the most controversial cartoon that you've ever drawn? We may not have it here tonight. More than likely, we don't. But give us a little background about it.
Well, I'll tell you the cartoons that draw controversy, strangely enough, are those that, as you've already talked about, speak about inclusion or equality. So the cartoons that draw the most attention and the most fire are those that have to do with the LGBTQ community and issues, women's equality, women's rights, feminism, spiritual abuse or church abuse, religious abuse, whatever you want to call it. Those are the three main areas that draw fire. Strangely enough, I think inclusion and equality are a good thing, but apparently those are the things people get most upset about. So those are the cartoons that receive the most fire. And so anything to do with homosexuality, anything to do with women's equality in the church, and anything that critiques what I think is abusive or manipulative or coercive power moves by church authority and leadership, I question that. Or if I critique a Christian hero, like a modern megachurch pastor, something he or she has said or done, that gets a lot of fire too. So,
What is the working premise for you questioning, the entire context of Christianity? What motivated you to question it?
well, I've always, ever since I was ordained, I mean, I was wrestling and struggling on the night of my ordination, the night before my ordination, because even though I believe in community, that people have the right to gather and collect around a common religious idea or whatever, I was always very skeptical of the power and the authority and that whole thing, and the structure, organization, and all that. So I've always struggled with it, but and just my own personal struggle is my worst fear. I think is I don't like to feel trapped, and I like to be able to think independently, and I like to be able to find my own path and walk my own way. And I've always looked for a place that has allowed for that and has embraced that sort of independent spirit. And unfortunately, that has not been my experience in the church. The church, for me, has always been a sort of constrictive, confining, limiting, has that kind of a feel to it. So I've always, so I wanted to stay, inside, but I wanted to be able to live independently. And those two things just don't seem to work. They just never seem to find a common, home, no matter where I was in any church. And so that's why I critique it. I think people should have the right to gather together, but unfortunately, this usually means conforming and signing on some dotted line, or limiting, or thinking in a certain way, or living in a certain way, or being a certain way. And unfortunately, my own experience is that's the way things are. Some people write me and say, "Oh, I found the perfect church where I can be a part of a congregation at the same time explore and be independent and ask questions and so on." And that's awesome. I applaud that. If you found it, it's very rare. Stay. But that hasn't been my experience.
Well, you said that for 30 years you were involved in the church in probably some sort of ministerial type of types of duties. So did you ever feel hypocritical? Here you are, for 30 years you're involved in something that would suppress women, and I'm not saying you did, but just the organization itself.
Right.
How did you feel about that? And how did you last for 30 years?
That's a good question. I don't know how I last for 30 years. But I did last for 30 years. And it's been over 3 years now. And it's taken me a long time to get over it, to deconstruct and to, move beyond it. It's been a very, very difficult process. And I know a lot of ministers and pastors who are in the ministry and struggling to leave or struggling to stay or who have left. It's a very, very difficult process. I know that firsthand. But I was ordained in the Presbyterian Church. I found myself in the Baptist Church, Pentecostal Church. I ended up in the Vineyard Movement. And the last church I was in, we had some wonderful moments. It was like an experiment. We tried these things and we had wonderful moments, but in the end, it just failed because, every movement or denomination has its ethos, or values, and which in the end I found just too limiting. And it came to the point where I realized trying to change the system from the inside, sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. In my case, it just wasn't working. And I just figured I had to leave, not only for my own well-being, but for the well-being of the church that I finally left. I didn't want to, fly that thing into the ground, into burning embers. I decided to leave before it was too late for them and for me. And it was, that was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And I'm glad I did it. And no looking back now. But while I was in the system, I did my best, and but in the end, I came to realize that I couldn't do it inside. So here I am.
Before we start
God.
looking at your work, I would like to get Bob and Christopher to state a few things.
Well, which one of us?
Well,
Rendered them speechless.
well, a B comes before C, so Bob, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear my back. I hope. Wait. Anyway, I first saw David's cartoons when I became involved on Facebook with an organization called like the Free Believers Network, and there were a number of people there who were fans. I'd never seen this stuff before, but I to me the impression was such a stark, naked honesty about some of the less than wonderful things about what the church does, and even sometimes not intentionally, but often with just a deliberate perspective of our culture that is terrible. I particularly liked in keeping up with it from day to day, watching how many of his cartoons will often reflect issues that are currently present. Like the one time when the Pope was talking about people who were really going to be acceptable, and then I guess the archbishops decided not to kind of go along with that, and then you had that one cartoon of the Pope fishing, and he has to throw one back or something.
Yeah, the catch and release.
The catch and release to me. But the thing is that impresses me about this, and I like other people who are curious about this in following you, there's something about a picture that can be so inarticulate and yet so clear in saying something that I think that's what I've really enjoyed, is the way you capture with just a certain number of lines and a certain number of visuals that we just can clearly see something going on that asks us, is this right? Should we be doing this? Does this make sense? Is this coherent? I love it.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
right, because you really don't need any verbiage whatsoever, and most of the pics, they speak for themselves. I mean, they're just very self-explanatory. Absolutely.
Yeah, I try to write I accompany all my cartoons with some kind of a meditation or a reflection. But you know what I'm realizing? Most people don't read that stuff. They just look at the cartoon.
Right.
And I have a lot of friends that are like, just shut up and draw. They're like.
Yeah. I read
But,
the stuff.
I-
I read the stuff just to see if I'm on the right, if I was getting the right page, and I often enjoy what you write as well. But it is true that the cartoons do speak for themselves and rather clearly.
Well, I know, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And I really do think that's true. And if I can draw in one frame, an idea or a critique, and it's a little bit, the cartoons, I think a cartoon is a powerful way to communicate, because you're kind of joking, but at the same time, you're saying something rather serious. And so I think cartoons in general do have that kind of a power that I appreciate. I like writing too, though, because some issues demand more treatment. So if I'm critiquing another pastor's ideas or another pastor's actions, or some church's policies or something, then there might be a cartoon, but I feel the need to maybe write an argument or something. I always try to be fair and kind, but I think if the church wants to succeed or to continue, then I think we need these kinds of things to help us, along the way to be better at what we're doing. But yeah, I appreciate that, Bob. The one frame cartoons, I do try to say it all in one picture.
Christopher, what are your thoughts thus far? We haven't, gotten into the photos, the art yet, but what are your thoughts? We're not hearing your audio for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I've only very recently gotten introduced to David's art, and it has been through Facebook, and it's mostly been through the Cult of Honesty, to be honest. Some of the members there have posted a bunch of things about the Naked Pastor and a bunch of his cartoons, and I have to admit that I am a comic freak. Have been for years. So the fact, and I love the fact that you talked about the what I'm going to call your simple honesty. And it's simple because you are able to capture it in one frame. And I think that is a testament of how good you are at what you do. Because if you can say it in one frame instead of two or three or multiple frames, then you're really crystallizing your thought in a way that other people can't, that have to use more than one frame. And the fact that you also use very few words usually in the cartoons that you draw, it just gives that much more credence to the fact that the visual images that you use and the simple lines that you use, like everything about it is simple, but that's what makes it so much more powerful.
Okay.
So, and I'm an atheist, and the cartoons that you draw definitely resonate with me, and it raises a couple questions for me about what the goal is about these commentaries that you're making. Is it to change the church, or is it to pull people away from the church that you're criticizing?
Okay. Well, so you're asking if my cartoons are trying to turn people off of the church?
No,
Or
I
if
mean,
they're-
not necessarily to turn them off from it, but are you trying to change the institution, or are you trying to open people's eyes to the critiques that you see should be levied against the institution?
Yeah. You know what? I really don't have a huge agenda. Like, I like to draw, and I like to, I love to critique what I think is stupid, or abusive, or unfair, or unequal, or, cruel, or, abusive. Maybe I've already said that. But, or sexist, or whatever. Like, I just love pointing that stuff out. Like, and I have, seriously, folks, every day I get email from somebody. I can't believe you're broadcasting the problems of the church for the whole world to see. It's almost like an alcoholic, in a family who's supporting an alcoholic or some kind of abuse. To keep it in the family. We'll deal with it. Don't let anybody else know. Keep it inside. And that really is the attitude of the church. And I'm thinking, my attitude is no. Let's be honest. That's why I use the word naked pastor. It's not me. It's totally not me about me being naked. It's about me bearing my soul and just being honest about what's going on in the church, because I believe the church has the right to exist. People have the right to go and be a part of a community of whatever, including cults of honesty, whatever. It doesn't matter. But for me, let's do it in a healthy manner. That's what I care about. And so I critique these things and just lay it out in the open.
Right.
Just trusting that if we look at these, if we're honest with ourselves, we'll deal with these issues honestly, and maybe move in a direction that is more healthy and beneficial to everybody. So I don't
and people can do what they will. It's really, you're not, as long as they respond to it in a healthy manner, let them do what they do.
When I first came across your work, David, one of the things that came to my mind, and I don't know if this relates to why you refer to yourself as the naked pastor, but it reminded me of a story in the Bible about Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve were naked, supposedly, in the story. And when they ate of a particular piece of fruit, they became ashamed. And when I heard the terms naked pastor, it reminded me of someone who said to themselves, listen, why do I have to be ashamed simply because I've messed up in life? Why can't I simply embrace, myself and accept myself for who I am? And so I started looking through those particular eyes, in a sense, at your artwork, because it was impressing me in that kind of context, if that makes sense.
No, totally. Like I said, I started blogging back in 2005 or something like that, and I started cartooning in around 2006, and it was just me just talking about my struggles as a pastor and just trying to be as real as possible, just to let people see that pastors are real people too, and they have their own struggles and even theological struggles. And nobody was reading it. And then after a while, some people started reading it. My cartoons, more people were reading it. But right up until near the very end, not even anybody in my congregation was reading it. Like, they're like, why would we want to? We already hear you for so long on Sunday. Why in the world would we want to hear from you every day? So they didn't even read it. They didn't even care. But then when it got to the point where more and more people were reading it and people were starting to hear about it and talk about it, that's when it started getting me into trouble with the denomination, with members of the congregation, and so on, because I was exposing myself, and as a result, I was exposing a problem with the church. Right? I was exposing my own struggles, theologically, philosophically, whatever, and as a result, I was exposing the problem with the church was that I wasn't free to struggle in this way while in the church, never mind being employed by it, right? So it created quite a tension until it came to the point where I could no longer stay. The reason we gave, the leadership team and I, the reason we gave the church was that we were no longer compatible. And it kind of sounds like a marriage, doesn't it?
I was thinking that, like a divorce, irreconcilable differences.
Which is a shame. I think people should be able to explore and question and doubt and even lose a lot of their theology or even their faith and still be a part of a community.
Absolutely.
But that just isn't the case in most situations.
Okay, we have, we already mentioned him, Michael Fulford, and a man of few words tonight. He's in studio. And Michael, what do you think so far? Have you been exposed to the Naked Pastor's cartoons yet?
Well, I've not been as active on Facebook as Bob and Mountie, but I've taken the opportunity to kind of go through his blog and look at some of the comics. And first, just as an atheist, obviously I have many criticisms against especially organized religion. Yeah. I do, however, like seeing when people inside the religion criticize it. Of course, I will say this, I don't think there's any truth to the religion itself regardless, but when we look at any time that someone tries to improve it, make it more progressive, it happens from the outside in, and so I applaud anybody who does that. And I have enjoyed some of the comics. Was reading the one you posted most recently on loneliness, and I, as an atheist in a very, very conservative state, I can kind of understand where he's coming from.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, I have a very healthy inner atheist. That's what I say, and I mean that sincerely. Like, there are very, very strong streams of atheism flowing through my own, thought and theology or whatever you want to call it, and those are some of those cartoons are very upsetting for people as well. Where I expressed a sort of an atheistic perspective on the church or on theology or on God or whatever. So those are also very disturbing to some people in the church. Although I have to admit, though, a lot of these cartoons that sort of broach that subject are received very well by a lot of people who are inside the church but are afraid to sort of come out of the closet theologically, who have been struggling with their faith and with the existence of sort of a separate deity or whatever sitting in the heavens, And so these cartoons are in many cases helpful for people to transition away from a more conservative or whatever theology to something more liberal, maybe more open-minded, and maybe even embrace their own atheism at some point.
Right. Let's go ahead and pull up the first cartoon. I think this is.
I think this is one of his titled artworks.
Okay, it's a piece of art, but it was something that really challenged me. It's actually, I don't know whether it's Jesus or David or me or someone else climbing through this image that looks like a cross. What are your thoughts on this, and what inspired you to put this piece together?
I call that the narrow way. And it was originally, I designed that for a T-shirt. So that was, I did that years ago. Yeah, basically it's symbolizes the way of the cross, I suppose, and how the cross, for me, was sort of the symbol for the narrow way. So that's simply what that is. It's not Jesus, it's just anybody.
When you talk about a narrow way, what exactly does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's kind of like Leonard Cohen said, the Canadian singer songwriter. He felt the symbol of the cross intersected every aspect of human existence, and other philosophers have felt the same way, like Krishnamurti and some Gandhi and so on. That the cross was sort of the symbol of self-sacrifice, of surrender, of being present in the now, the lack of ambition or greed, all these kinds of things. So that for me symbolizes the narrow way of, it's not like a lot of theologians or pastors would like to insist that it's, abiding by a very certain type or kind of theology. For me, it's a way of life, not a way of thinking.
So would you say, and this just came in my mind, that the cross, if we would strip that away and make that not so, I don't know, huge in the world, that more people would feel included in the love of either a historical Jesus or any type of a supreme, being? It seems like that the cross, excuse me, does nullify a lot of people that it shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very reluctant anymore to use certain words or even symbols unless I'm using them against themselves in a way. So yeah, the cross or the crucifixion, even though it's still used by many people, even Slavoj Žižek, the modern day philosopher, talks quite a bit about the crucifixion and the monstrosity of Christ and all this kind of thing. It can be a barrier for some people, just because anything to do with church, anything to do with Christian symbols or theology is an immediate trigger for a lot of people. So I'm very reluctant to use the word belief or even faith or God or these kinds of things because they just come with so much baggage. But I agree, yeah.
This cross picture looks to me like it's a cutout that's so narrow that he really can't get out of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of inhibiting his motion, and yet he is trying to move forward and perhaps can't.
Yeah. The main thrust of the drawing is that the cross is the narrow way, not or the way of the cross is the narrow way, not like I said, evangelical theology or whatever, right?
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Let's move to our second pick. I find this fascinating, and I think most atheists would also. And it says herd. I find so many people to have. Okay, I guess I'm going backwards. I was provided with. Let's see if we can get our ducks in a row.
Well, I'll tell you what. When it pops up, we'll just
Yeah,
find it.
pop up.
Yeah, just talk
J-
whatever
There it
one
goes.
pops up.
Okay.
Oh, heard.
Okay, you see what's popping up. What are your thoughts on this, and what motivated you to draw this?
I can't see what you're talking about.
This is a guy praying, and he's like, "Oh Lord, I want to thank you that I was born in the West and not some other God-forsaken place, and I was able to become a Christian, and I'm thankful. I have to think hard about what I believe."
Yeah, yeah. Well, isn't that true though? I mean,
It's true. It is
true.
true.
I mean, that we just are born with a whole set of values and a way of thinking and privilege and so on that I sure hope that some people certainly don't get on their knees and thank God for that, but I think that's sort of an assumption in the West that we, you know, our ideas and everything, the way we think about, you know, these things is correct and it's the right way, just because, you know, we have this sense of privilege that we're not even aware of. So yeah, that was a very popular / unpopular cartoon. Yeah.
Let's go to our next
like it.
cartoon.
It's interesting the ones you guys have picked.
Yeah.
Well, we picked these. We wanted to go with all of them, but to be honest with you, we didn't think we had enough time, and so we're going to take our time with these. This one states, "I believe I was given this long, pointy finger so that I could publicly humiliate you, judge you, and condemn you to hell." I like that.
You know, I just heard from a couple of different people today who are publicly embarrassed by their pastors today in church. Just because, you know, some people think they have the right to do that to other people. People who have authority or spiritual authority over others just think they have the right to humiliate other people and shame them in front of others as a means of getting across their agenda or what they want. So, you know, I'm definitely poking fun at that, or, you know, shining the light on that, which I think it's totally wrong. But, you know, do you remember that story that was going around Facebook there some time ago about Pastor Stepek? And it was in some big church, mega church. I think it might have been in New York or something. And it was supposed to be his first Sunday.
Yes.
And he went in dressed as a homeless person. And everybody mistreated him. They sat him in the back, and, you know, nobody would help him and so on. And then when it came time to introduce the new pastor, he walked up to the front, and everybody was ashamed and crying and turned red, and, you know, and he blasted them with the scripture verse, you know, and just totally humiliated them. And people were going, "Oh no, this story is so awesome, so incredible." And I was like, "This is horrible. This is a horrible way to treat people."
Right.
And you know what? 99% of the response I got from that article, which, by the way, went viral, but and it wasn't even a true story. It was all fiction, but everybody still thought it was an amazing story and should have happened. And, you know, most of the comments I got back from people were like, "Yeah, man, they should have been ashamed. They should have been treated that way." And this, in my mind, just goes to show how shame and shaming people and embarrassing people and humiliating people publicly is just one of the major tools in our belt, especially in the church. So that's what that cartoon's critiquing.
But I guess I'm sort of on the fence about this. Do you think if he used it as, and he did an object lesson, but he didn't get up and lambast the folks, after the fact, if he got up and said, sort of like that book, In His Steps, whenever the homeless man comes up there and he challenges the congregation, I think it's fine to do an object lesson type thing like that, but to humiliate somebody for their response to something, I think just the lesson itself should speak volumes without you having to humiliate somebody. And maybe, what do you think?
Well, apparently, this is based on a story of a pastor who did go homeless for 4 days and lived on the streets, and then he preached a whole series on his experience, just shared his experience of what it was like to be a homeless person. That's entirely different. Or, as I suggested in my post, what if he had primed the elders, who obviously they knew who he was, all the elders, and they cooperated with his scheme. What if he primed all the elders and say, listen, I'm going to show up as a homeless person. Why don't you guys, I want you to show me generosity, treat me well. Let's see how the congregation responds. I bet they would have got a totally different reaction. It's because
Right.
when you can prime people for the reaction that you want.
Yes.
He set them up for failure, but he could have set them up for success.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
but he chose to set them up for failure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you said it more eloquently than I did, but that's where I was going with it.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that book Black Like Me, the
Oh.
white fellow who injected himself so that he actually his skin went darker, and he discovered what it was like to have to move through society as a black person who actually was accustomed to being a recipient of just ignored white privilege. Or some of these people who have actually traveled around in a fat suit, who are usually quite svelte, and this, and they begin to discover the way that that people are treating others who we find unpleasant for whatever reasons, and instead of treating them like dignified, decent, valuable human beings, we treat them in ways that are just painful.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Shame is a great way to keep everybody conformed.
Let's go to our next cartoon.
Aren't you thankful you don't have to think anymore, because I just tell you what to believe, says the unconventional past.
I love this one because, I mean, it's so typical, so typical.
Yeah. It's just a reality. When I was pastoring churches, and I encourage people to think for themselves and to question and to explore and so on, a surprising number of people were like, please just tell us what to believe,
Really?
Oh, yeah.
The reason why I ask is because, and I need Michael to help me out with this. As atheists, there are other atheists that will pretty much discount anything a theist has to say because they pretty much have this stereotypical opinion that theists, Christians, are just mindless drones listening to whatever authoritative person tells them what to believe. And I've spent so much of my life disabusing myself of that stereotype. But Michael, is that not a stereotype amongst atheists, that like theists and Christians are just spooning up the pablum of pastors and authoritative figures?
It happens frequently enough.
Yeah, it is a stereotype, and I talked about it a little bit this morning on my show. I was actually going to say, though, that I've seen this on from the atheist side as well, that atheists will readily accept anything that's critical of religion. If you look at the Zeitgeist film, the information that's in there is repeated all over the place online. It's even in Bill Maher's film Religulous.
Yes.
So,
Right.
I mean, you get that from both sides, where people will be, they. That's why I advocate skeptical thinking instead of just being an atheist.
I hear what you're saying. So, in other words, what you're addressing is the fact that regardless of theism, atheism, or whatever, humans are prone to fall into dogmatic thinking.
Yep.
And want to receive revelation or authoritative information.
An odd
yeah.
story that happened to me is I was pastor of a church, and there was a woman who was coming to see me on a regular basis. She was struggling with alcoholism, had been with a number of other men who were alcoholics, and she was cheating on me. She was actually seeing another pastor. And I would see
Bob, hold on for a minute. That's funny. I mean, and it's typical. It's typical.
but yeah.
A lot of
but
my
the-
people were
The
Pollyanna.
thing that would happen was this.
Get
I
more
would
specific,
sometimes
Bob.
give her
Polyclerical, is that what you said?
that was his clerical, but I would give her advice, the best advice I could, from week to week, and she'd come back and she'd say, "Well, I was talking to this other guy, Michael McKimmey, and I said the same thing, and he told me this." And she did this to me several times, and every time she told me what Michael McKimmey said, I listened to it and I said, "That's powerful. That's brilliant. That's far better than anything I ever thought of." And when the church, that was a struggling church, and when things came to an end there, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, I decided rather than seek some other place, I actually went over to that church and I met this guy, and we became good friends. And he was a pastor there at that church for 13 years, and I can tell you right now that I have no clue what that guy believes. He never would tell the people what he believed. If he spoke from a topic, he would give us a survey of what has been said by some of the greatest thinkers and what they had to say about it. And you couldn't nail him to the wall. And I asked him, "How do you do this, and why did you do this?" And he said that when he was going to Nyack College, he was turned off by the way he saw some of the young students there were developing followings, and he decided he didn't want any disciples, and so he was never going to express his own opinion. And I suppose his opinion came out in various ways, no doubt. But I was surprised. He was a pastor for 13 years there, and he never told people what he thought. That was amazing to me.
But you have to admit that that's an anomaly.
Yeah.
Oh, it definitely is. He's the only guy I've ever known like that. And he eventually left the ministry, and today he's a psychotherapist and a reputed Buddhist scholar. But that doesn't mean he's a Buddhist. But he's definitely one of these people who is extremely familiar with Buddhist philosophy, and he's also a philosophy professor now, too. But I tell you, it was amazing. I'd never met anybody like that. He had a huge influence on me.
I just find it surprising to find that stereotype reinforced in cartoons like this.
We were watching a Baptist pastor this morning, and I'll be honest with you, it's how we get our laughs. This pastor was telling people how to deal with those people who question the Old Testament. He says it's simple. The only thing that you have to tell people when they question all of the maniacal stories that go on in the Old Testament, simply say this: the Lord is God. And that was the answer that he gave the people. And then he had them repeat it about 5 or 10 times. And that seemed to satisfy the congregation. And it reminds me so much of this cartoon, because it seems like people in the pews want to parrot what the pastor does preach or teach. And why do you think that is true, David?
Well, it's just a human thing. Like we want. I think we're very troubled, afraid. We're in. A lot of us are walking in darkness and confusion. We're faced with huge questions like death and dying and suffering and all kinds of things. And we want and need simple answers. Just tell me what to believe. And I've seen it all the time. even though I encourage people to question and to explore. Who was it that suggested skeptical thinking? Who was that, Mike?
Yes,
Michael?
that was me.
Yeah, I love that. And just to question, and I would actually watch people start to move in that direction, and their minds would open up and their